Hello, my name is Elissa Weinzimmer, founder of Voice Body Connection and also creator of the online course, How Your Voice Works. I'm really excited today to be adding some bonus content to the How Your Voice Works course by having a conversation here with Tom Burke, my friend and mentor and singing coach, and founder of Tom Burke Voice Studio, and also you created Broadway Voice Box, the online singing training program. So Tom, really excited to have you here today. And what I want to talk about with you today is why it's valuable for singers to learn vocal anatomy, because obviously that's very much what I teach. It is a huge part of what you teach and what I've learned from you. And so I'd love to have a conversation about why that's an important part of singing training. But before we dive into that, can you talk a little bit about what brought you to the moment that you're in now, being a singing teacher and working with people all over the world and just all the things you do?
Yes, the 40 years in review.
Yes, please, if you would.
Everything that brought me here. Great. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
I'm so happy, of course.
And now I will talk about myself.
Great.
So my voice teacher in high school was a speech pathologist, and that sparked an idea. When I grew up playing the piano, and from when I was like 5 years old, I think I learned to read music before I learned to read words. So I knew that I wanted to be in the arts in some level, but I think my parents wanted me to be an investment banker that played the piano on the side. I knew that I wanted something else. So in high school, when I was studying with Mrs. Freund, Anna Dalby Freund, she was a speech pathologist and a voice teacher in Glen Rock, New Jersey. And all the cool kids at Act Two Performing Arts Center studied with Mrs. Freund. So that's how I got to know her, from the performing arts program I went to. And what I thought was really cool as I was approaching college was that she was able to weave in and out of both the left brain and right brain. So she was clearly she was a Juilliard trained opera singer, and yet she was also a business person that had a speech pathology practice. She was teaching at a university. She was lecturing for NATS and for ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association. And I just thought she was really cool. And she was also a real person. So even in her almost 80, when I was studying with her, I asked her, so Mrs. Freund, how do you do all this? And you're like a grandma. And she said, a martini, 2 martinis, 4 o'clock every day. So she was a character. And I think she informed a lot of the way I work now. Trying to balance being like classy but fun, and being an artist, but being a scientist as well. So I think that Mrs. Freund very much informed my career. So flash forward through speech pathology training, I also studied with a teacher at the Peabody Conservatory who was also interested in anatomy and physiology, who was also friends with my speech pathology supervisor. So I think I've always had a marrying of the idea that art and science don't need to be these separate disciplines, but then they can actually inform each other.
And I have a question for you, actually, which is, did you go into speech pathology before you started singing? Was that your path first?
I did. So my goal was, mom and dad are paying for college. So if they want an investment banker and I want a singer-actor, we settled on a speech pathologist that could afford to be a singer-actor.
Makes sense.
So I studied speech pathology first. And the goal was to build the private practice and to always have that operating in the background to inform my own personal performance career.
So cool. Yeah. Anything else you want to do to bring us up to date now, like how you...
Just over the years, I worked at a head and neck cancer center in Baltimore, but also worked with professional singers and actors. So again, I think everything up to today has always been a combination of art and science. And I don't think I necessarily separate the two.
Yeah.
They're all part of eventually what winds up as great storytelling on stage.
Yeah. I love that. And so if I'm not mistaken, today, a huge part of who you work with is singers and performers. That's kind of become a passion for you. I don't think I should say kind of, it's become a passion for you to work primarily with singers and performers. So how much, I guess, this is bridging into the big question, which is how much of all of this science stuff do you share with them? How much do you think they need to know? We could even, I could ask the question, like in a given private hour-long session with a singing student who maybe, is on Broadway or wants to be on Broadway, how much time do you spend talking about how their vocal folds work? And how much time do you, sing the scales?
Great. I think I separate the discussion into two different parts. So there's the voice therapy aspect of things, and then there's the voice training aspect of things. So from a voice therapy perspective, if something has gone wrong, it makes sense to break down with someone how things work first before you start prescribing a new way of working the system. So I think certainly for voice therapy clients, a lot of helping them get back on track or recover from an injury is pausing for a sec to say, like, here's how the voice works, here's the anatomy and physiology, here's what may have transpired prior to this injury, here are some of the recommended research mechanisms by which you get back on track. And so here's the prescription. Okay, now we might do tons of sensory work and actual exercises, but that context around how things work, I feel accelerates the progress. And what I found that my voice therapy clients wind up being my best singers because they have a whole brain approach to singing in a way. They have a deep understanding of how the voice works and how they can work the voice.
So cool.
So with singers, I try to be more sensitive to their artistic process. So often I will ask, hey, do you want me to tell you what I'm doing or just do it to you? So oftentimes, so I would say I get 50-50 response. Some people want to retain the mystique that is the voice, and they don't necessarily want to know. Other people have been hunting for the answers of like, I feel this sensation, but I have no idea why that works, and it's driving me nuts. If I knew, I could control it. I think at the end of the day, as the teacher, still needs to have some sort of deep scientific-based rationale for why I would say anything. So that it's not my opinion, that whenever possible, trying to get as close to fact as possible. So I think both parties can certainly benefit. I think sometimes the singers who want to retain mystique might need to be led to the anatomy and physiology waters a little bit later, but even they eventually are blown away by fully understanding how the system works.
Cool.
If I may, I also have another thing too, just about that.
Of course.
A shorthand.
Yeah.
A shorthand around the world, if in dance class, a plie is a plie is a plie. Yet around the world, if you describe things with voice, you're going to get a million different ways to try and get the same thing.
Amen.
And I feel like, there's a shorthand in dance because you can see things. There's a clear vocabulary that everyone uses. And it relates to direct anatomical positions, right? So a demi-plie is halfway between your standing straight up and full-on grand plie. Like that's it, 50%, halfway. And so there's not an equivalent system when it comes to working with the voice. And I think that's why I was initially drawn to the Estill Voice training work, because it was the first time I felt there was an attempt at a meeting of the minds between the scientific community and the artistic community. Yeah. And seen.
Yeah. Good. Well, no, I really appreciate you saying that because so Estill Voice work, for those who are listening who don't know what that is, I'll put a link to it so that people can do a little bit of research, but really created by a speech pathologist, Joe Estill, right? And
she was a voice, she was beginning her voice science research.
Okay. And she came up with a lot of ways to specifically describe like what a demi-plie with the vocal cords would be, for instance, right? like what the positions are. And I guess my question for you, Tom, is do you think, because I've been wondering about this myself, do you think that the reason that we don't have that specific vocabulary about the voice as often is because it's in here and we can't see it? Is that what's going on, or is there other stuff going on?
I think that's the main reason. I think that there would be less conjecture, less opinion if more things were visible.
Right.
And certainly the more research that has come about also tends to dispel myth. and also support a more universal approach to singing. The thing that goes into with voice is that there's a lot of aesthetic bias.
Right.
That opera is inherently safer than belting. And I don't know if that bias exists in I don't know if someone would say ballet is inherently safer than tap or contemporary.
Yeah. I mean, some people might argue, but yeah, it's most people would then go, they're different, right?
Yes. So a lot of the research is around operatic singing, and more, in recent years, there've been more research around non-classical techniques. But I think a lot of that, so that's where, because there's research that says this, and that's also associated with opera, people think that that's the answer. Whereas it's the spirit of the law here is just that we're looking for what is the scientific underpinnings of this voice quality.
Right.
And how do you do that safely across a number of different contexts? And again, that's what I think drew me to the Estill work.
Yeah, because when you decide that there's a good way to sing or a bad way to sing, then you start having good ways to use your anatomy and bad ways to use your anatomy, right? To use your body. Whereas when we just, basically what you're saying is, you know, opera needs this versus musical theater might need something different. You know, they require different sounds, and therefore instead of trying to train our instrument in one way, we're actually training, if we want to do everything, we're training flexibility and the options to do many things, right?
Yes, I think because unlike other types of full body related things, there are a number of ways to do like different vocal tasks, and it depends upon the intention.
Right.
So for example, I'm not a dancer at all. You would laugh if you saw me in dance class. I imagine, though, that a grand jeté, leaping across the stage, is the convergence of multiple little steps. And if you don't do those steps, you don't get quite the leap.
That's definitely true. Right? Yeah.
So in the same way, I think that when it comes to voice, it's like, well, I want to project this sound. Okay, well, are you projecting with a mic or without a mic? Are you projecting without a mic in a music theater context, or are you projecting without a mic in an operatic context? So the intention and the context dramatically affect how you're going to do that movement. So I think that this might be an overgeneralization, but I think when it comes to voice, there's just infinitely more variables. And that's why you need to know all the isolated parts so you can mix and match those things to suit the context. Otherwise, you're left with a vocal one-trick pony. Yeah,
non-choices, like just habits, right?
Yeah, or just that this is your voice. Really, you can use your voice in infinite ways versus having like, this is how I drive my voice.
Yeah, right. It can be any sort of vehicle that you choose it to be in many ways, right?
You're both the vehicle and the road.
Yeah,
at the same time.
Good point. And that's maybe some of the challenge about voice too, is that, you know, I mean, I often, and I'm going to ask you in just a second, one of your favorite, you know, anatomical things about the voice, so we can just share fun facts. But something that I often like to share with people is that, you know, we hear ourselves differently than everyone else hears us, right? We hear ourselves through bone conduction primarily, and also our sound bouncing off the walls and coming back to us. But everyone else is just hearing us through sound waves hitting their eardrums, right? So our voice literally sounds different to us than it does to anyone else. We are indeed not only the vehicle, but also the road, like you say, right? So let me ask you that question too, since I just shared a fun fact, which is, you know, talk about the diaphragm, talk about the vocal cords, talk about anything you want to. What's something that when you learned it or when it started to become clear to you because of your study of the anatomy and physiology, you went, oh my goodness, thank God, now I have to teach this to people. What kind of reaction?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
I think learning that your voice is more than just your vocal folds. And probably that the vocal folds comprise a very small percentage of what goes into a voice quality. And so I like learning and playing and experimenting with what minor adjustments in the lips, the tongue, the soft palate or velum, and the larynx do with the sound. And so in particular, because I think it helps demystify some of the things that go into singing. So for example, I often have people work on overtone singing, or what I call aliens.
I love aliens.
as a reference point for how to sing in different styles. So what sounds like magic, if I do where they're doing two pitches at once, people like on the YouTubes go nuts.
Yes.
But really, it's not that fancy. It's if you understood the science behind it.
Yeah, tell us the science behind it.
It does not need a whole like master's degree.
Right.
But now, it's great. So let's talk about it.
Okay.
I'm not an acoustician. I can certainly bring up what I know about this. But your vocal folds are vibrating at a certain pitch. Yes?
Fundamental frequency, right?
That pitch is what we perceive as the note. So like your vocal folds are vibrating a certain frequency or rate of vibration. That rate is what it corresponds to the pitch, or what you hear as the note on the piano. And now that's just the pitch, but then the timbre of the tone is also informed by the tube through which that vibration moves. Right. So if you have a long tube, meaning if your lips are protruded and your larynx is lower, you're going to be in a longer tube versus if you spread your lips and you raise your larynx. All those things affect the amplification of certain harmonics or the other parts of the pitch. And again, you can infinitely read about harmonics and overtones and formants, but just know that changes in the tube is going to affect the timbre and also the ability to amplify certain subcomponents of that pitch. Right. And so, I'll just interrupt very briefly to say that, to tie this back into how your voice works in the course, you're basically talking right now about the resonance stuff, which is the fifth module in the course. But also when we talk about the vocal cords and the fundamental frequency, that's the sound coming from the vocal folds. So that's actually, we're talking about the interplay between sound and resonance, right? Correct. And so if you hear that thing that I just did, and you hear two pitches, if you don't really understand the subtlety of the difference between the vocal folds and the tube in which the vocal folds exist, you're going to hear two pitches and think that you have to do something with your vocal folds differently. Right. But really you don't. You still do the same thing with your vocal folds. You have to do something different with your the tube. Yeah. And you can't necessarily see what I'm doing. If I'm doing I'm doing very minor adjustments with the tongue and the larynx. Tiny, right? Right. So imagine if you didn't know what your larynx was, or that it moves up and down, or how it connects to your tongue. Yeah. How your tongue is separate from your larynx. And all those things, if you knew that stuff, doing the crazy tricks are actually infinitely easier. Right. Right. You're starting at a certain level of awareness. And I like to use a different car metaphor, which is that, I wouldn't open up the hood of my car and start tinkering around and trying to fix something if I didn't understand what the transmission was and how the engine worked and everything. And to be honest, I don't, so I won't do that. But, that's how I treat my voice, is that I really don't think that I, can very effectively tinker with it and start changing what I'm doing if I don't understand what the components are, right? Yeah, I want to go further with that analogy. So please. I'm in this old house that we just bought. Okay. And old houses can be money pits, or they can be exciting adventures if you are willing to figure out what you can do on your own. Right. And so honestly, fixing a window sounds like, oh my God, as a New Yorker who's just always had a super, who knows how to fix that window? But really, if you look on YouTube and understand the parts of an old window with the cool little, where the rope goes and fixing the hooji-majigger, I don't know. The hooji-majigger, actually you can figure out how to fix the window on your own. Yeah. But totally. There's a little bit of a learning curve. I still don't know what the hooji-majigger is called. And so I can't necessarily go to the hardware store yet or ask my dad for help, or there's a vocabulary difference. So, but I have found that if you learn the vocabulary and you learn how things work and you learn the parts, you can do a lot of self-work. Otherwise, you're constantly left to relegate your process to working with someone else. You'll always need a teacher. And the funny thing about like what you and I are doing is we're kind of like, I always say like, good for you, bad for business.
Right. Career liability, right?
You're like just like teaching people how to vocally fish instead of giving them the vocal fish.
Yeah. If someone's showed up for too many sessions with me, I'm like, okay, this is your last one. We're
time
done
for you to fly the coop, my dear.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it's totally, it is a career liability, but we both like working that way, and it's exciting, and there's more people who want to learn about their voices. So hopefully, right?
Well, I think we can all play at a different advanced level with our clients.
Right.
If people are operating at a certain joint level of awareness.
Yeah. And that's honestly, when I had the idea, which, I was talking to you when I was first creating this course, when I had the idea to create How Your Voice Works, it was born out of the fact that I went, if every single person walked in through the door to a private session with me, knowing this stuff already, it would be amazing. I'd be so grateful if we had already had the conversation about how the machine works. So now we can play with it. Right. Or how the window works. So now we can repair it and then keep working on up-leveling the whole house.
Correct. I think that's what will help people understand the value of the work, is that it's like, how your voice works is not a terminal degree. It's not, yay, now you know how the voice works. The goal,
you're done.
learn how the voice works so that you can work your voice.
Yeah, it's a springboard. Exactly. Yeah. And then, people want to sing, go see Tom. He's amazing. And, and obviously I take people to the next level with presence and lots of things as well. I do have another question for you. This is really fun. I'm enjoying this conversation. So I guess this is maybe my last kind of wrap up question, which is part of the reason I created How Your Voice Works as well is because I found that even as a MFA, as a master's student in theater voice pedagogy, I had to really go cherry picking around, trying to find the good resources that simply and clearly explained vocal anatomy. And I wanted to put them all, at least by my estimation, in one place. But I'm curious, what have been what have been the resources that you love the most? What would you recommend that people look at as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that is a valid concern and process that many people in our field are going through, that you have to sort of scotch tape together like an understanding of the voice, because it's not all in one spot. And I think where you and I really connected was this idea of trying to crowdsource and curate information for other people. And so that's what's really informed Broadway Voice Box. I mean, not that this is a sales pitch at all, but it's really it's okay. Broadway Voice Box was my attempt to curate and find the common thread through a number of other disciplines. So for example, when I was in college, I was looking through Backstage magazine because I think the interwebs were just really coming around. So people didn't have websites, Right. So I knew that I wanted to be a voice teacher in New York City, but I knew that I would be young coming out, because most people who are speech pathologists in our field are singers first, and then in their 30s or 40s. At least when I was starting out, most people did the singing track first, and then in their 30s or 40s went back for a degree in speech pathology. Totally, and that's the theater voice teacher track as well. So I was I flipped that, and I knew I would be young, and as a result had to compete. So I looked and saw that, in Backstage, it was voice plus Alexander, voice or Feldenkrais, voice and yoga, voice and the breath, voice and et cetera. And so that made me think, even just from a business and a marketing perspective, that I need to be able to functionally communicate in all those disciplines. So by exploring Pilates, Feldenkrais, yoga, Alexander, Fitzmaurice voice work, Lesak, Laban, viewpoints, all those
Estill,
things. Estill, you'll find speech pathology, all that stuff. You'll find that there are through lines across each of them. And then there are some universal truths that are woven throughout each of them that, as the singer, might finally make something click because one aspect of this method makes sense and the other aspect of this method.
Yeah.
Or as a teacher, you're you're hearing that, okay, everyone is on some level saying the same thing, but this particular way of languaging it might work well for this person. Right. But what's cool about if you understood the anatomy and physiology, like on a if you were an alien and you came down to Earth and you just know your facts, this is like the anatomy and physiology is like what's the base of that, and then all of the other works and methods are kind of like different cultural ways of languaging that and infusing that into your own process. Yeah, that I love that. That's great. And I could list off so many of the things you listed are stuff I've explored as well. And I think I certainly believe that I want to encourage my students to be lifelong learners and learn from me and go learn from other places and books and people and everything. And I think I can totally speak for you when you say you feel we feel the same way. Can I speak for you? Is that okay? It depends, right?
Well, right, totally. But in the sense of like letting students, encouraging our students to keep learning, right? Not stop and just like you said before, like not, get the degree in How Your Voice Works or Broadway Voice Box or, Estill or whatever it is, and then be like, cool, I'm done. I learned everything. Because the more that we go cross-discipline and the more that we look at the things, the more that exactly like you're saying, we see the through lines. And that's certainly been my experience as well. Is that there just start to be some universal truths. Like one of my favorite things, and it's in the overview video, everyone can watch it, is this idea that came to me through multiple avenues that the voice goes up and out. And I was like, oh, that's a really useful thinking about the directionality of my voice, that it's actually literally the airflow is traveling up my windpipe through my vocal cords out this way. Somehow that's very, very helpful to me because I think we have this habit as human beings to sometimes squeeze in and push down, right? Which is going to isometrically put pressure on the directionality and energy of our voice. So, things like that, I heard it talked about one way from Kristen Linklater, another way from Catherine Fitzmaurice, another way from my opera singing training, and suddenly it clicked. Oh, that's actually a universal truth about the voice, right?
Correct.
So that's maybe an example of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And it may be one sentence in one book that was on one shelf in one corner of your room. That's why I think that what I like about coming back to the anatomy and physiology is that each of those things just reinforces something that exists. It's almost like when I love the figuring like where spirituality and quantum physics coincide. To me, it's like the same thing. It's like, wow, this very artistic way of languaging that also has some deep science.
Yes.
That supports why that works, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're exploring the sense of resonance, whether you're thinking of it as like opening your chakras or opening your sphincters or opening your false vocal folds,
right?
They're all different ways of saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, and coming back to, I think that just the biggest missing gap is often this anatomy piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're obviously engaged in this moment in a conversation that is a huge area of debate amongst voice teachers of all walks, whether it's theater, singing, or, presentation skills or what have you. And it's a really interesting debate. And, I guess maybe the crux of the debate is which came first, the science or the art, right? It's a chicken or egg question. And probably we can't answer that question. We can't say for sure that one thing comes first, but they certainly spiral into each other. And if you want to definitively say that the chicken came before the egg, now's your chance, right?
No, I would say that the spirit of the law is that all teachers at the end of the day don't want their students in their heads when they're performing. The goal here is unconscious competence. Yes?
Yep. Talk about it all the time. Yep.
And some people have a bias that they think that by learning about anatomy might demystify the process to the point that keeps you at conscious competence.
Right. Thinking about it and aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily agree. I think that it doesn't need to be part of your performance. You don't need to be thinking about your larynx as you're performing. But as part of your process, it's a useful exploration, just like everything else.
Yeah.
To make you a more well-rounded artist.
Yeah, totally. My language for that is often, this is the homework. This is the stuff that we study and work on at home. And then the present moment is indeed about something else. It's not about how high your larynx is in your throat. It's not about, making sure that your diaphragm's contracting outwards and downwards, it's,
Who wants to watch that?
right. I don't want to watch that. Right. Exactly. But it's really, really cool to do that homework and play around and open up possibilities so that those possibilities are then available to you when you step on stage. So cool. Awesome.
Agreed.
Yeah, I can tell we agree. So cool. Well, that's wonderful. And thank you for the window and the house metaphor. I like that a lot too. Yeah, going to think about that one. So have fun fixing up the house then.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for joining in and being part of this. And I'm really excited to continue the conversation. I think we're going to continue this conversation for a long time.
Agreed. To be continued.
To be continued. All right. Thanks, Tom Burke.
Be good.
Bye.